Okay, we have someone that's come all the way down from Ballina at great expense. And this is a bit of a cheap plug. This is my website, Commanding the Narrative, and I host 3 podcasts, which you can find here, and also articles that I might write for The Spectator and everything. So if you would like to keep up to date with everything that I'm doing, please head to commandingthenarrative.com and hit the little sign-up button at the top there, and you'll get a weekly newsletter from me. But our next speaker has been on my show quite often because he's just a wealth of knowledge, whether it be COVID or defence or energy. He's all over it. He's a former Lieutenant Colonel in the Australian Defence Force. He served 32 years there. He spent 4 years with the British Army. He's a mechanical engineer, an inventor, a businessman, and hopefully a New South Wales Senate candidate. Please welcome Kevin Loughrey.
Thank you, Steve. With an introduction like that. Look, I actually have a special guest here today, and that's Dr. Mai-Lee Trinh. Mai-Lee, would you stand up? One of my other many suits is that I was trained in biological warfare. As Stephen mentioned, I spent 4 years with the British Army. I was also, interestingly, an interpreter for the British Army on the Rhine, so I'm a person of many talents. We're helping, I actually head a bunch of policemen, and we're helping Mai-Lee with her defence in the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal. We've also written over 1,200 briefs of evidence for Dr. Melissa McCann in her class action for those persons who have been injured by the COVID vaccines. But that's not what I'm here today to talk about. And if we could start the slideshow, have we got the slides there? And in a way, I worry I'm going to be singing to the choir because I've heard a lot. So I just simply say go. It works. Science. Okay, well look, I've travelled 762 kilometres plus to be here to give you 10 minutes worth of my knowledge. Obviously, if I go to this sort of trouble, I must think what I'm about to tell you is worthwhile. And given that the time constraint, I must be brief, and I've used up about 3 minutes already. Okay, I could talk to you about the fact that for the last 8,000 years, the Earth's atmospheric temperature has been dropping. That's the result of ice cores. The top graph that you see there. The bottom graph is carbon dioxide. That was taken from an ice core in Antarctica. You'll notice that as the temperature has been dropping, carbon dioxide concentration in the Earth's atmosphere has been increasing. Now you might say, well, that was 8,000 years ago, and with this modern industrial era, we're now faced with unprecedented levels of carbon dioxide. So we take you to maximum temperatures for Australia. The khaki is from Australian archives, courtesy, to some extent, to Craig Kelly, that wonderful chap who was here just before. The next is from the Postmaster General's Department, and my father used to actually do some of these measurements. Thousands of people contributed to those measurements. And then the last part is from the Bureau of Meteorology, which I consider to be a corrupt and incompetent organisation. You might say, well, that's in Australia, but what I'd like to do is take you to the other side of the world and in another hemisphere, and there the plot is for the US Climatology Network. Now, I do tell you that these are climate or temperature measuring stations that have not been encroached upon by urbanisation, and therefore they are not affected by what's called the urban heat island effect. There's a law in atmospheric physics. I should tell you that I studied thermodynamics to 4th year university level with honours, and I call it Loughrey's law of open systems. It's sort of a metaphor of Pascal's law for incompressible fluids, and that is that a trend in any one part of an open system will be represented in all parts of that open system unless there is a local influence causing it to be otherwise, and that is Loughrey's law. Okay, now I've just shown you some results from Australia, from Australian citizens who measured temperature, and from American citizens who measured temperature. And there was no way that they could have collaborated. And now I'm showing you the Japanese Meteorological Agency's measurements from their Antarctic ice station. And you'll see from 1960 to the year 2020 that the temperature has generally been going down. All the time you're being told that the temperature's going up, that the world's boiling. It's bullshit, pardon the colourful language. Therefore, you can come to the conclusion that CO2, nitrous oxide and methane has no appreciable effect on the Earth's atmospheric temperature. And I can tell you that from my thermodynamic studies, that there's no way within the laws of physics or thermodynamics that these gases could materially affect the Earth's atmospheric temperature. So any pursuit of reducing the emissions of carbon dioxide are simply a waste of time. And in fact, carbon dioxide is greening the Earth. Since 1985 to the present day, the Earth has become around about 17% more green. Now, by that we mean that the leaf area has increased by about 17%. The ability of plants to absorb carbon dioxide is related to their leaf area. So that means that plants are absorbing something like an increase of 17% more carbon dioxide, but humans are only providing 3%. And the consequence of that is that the plants are actually taking up 5 times more carbon dioxide than humans are emitting. So what you can draw from that is that human emissions of carbon dioxide have absolutely nothing to do with increasing carbon dioxide concentrations in the Earth's atmosphere. And in fact, a fellow called Don Easterbrook, a professor from Canada, has opined that this carbon dioxide is actually coming from the oceans. I agree with him. Also, I'm in good company with Professor Will Happer, who happens now to be a friend of mine, thanks to my activities, Dr. Richard Lindzen, Professor Dr. Richard Lindzen, and Professor Dr. John Clauser, who recently won the Nobel Prize for his work on clouds affecting climate. All 3 of those gentlemen agree with me, or more precisely, I agree with them, for they eclipse me by a country mile when it comes to their expertise. They basically say that there is absolutely no way that carbon dioxide can appreciably affect the Earth's atmospheric temperature. If you haven't already, I'd advise you to go and look at Climate the Movie, climatethemovie.net. You'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, now this is what we're supposed to have if you have the most efficient electricity generation system, and we once had this. The black line is your baseload power production facilities, and if you want the cheapest power from your baseload production facilities, you must drive them at 100% of their capacity at 100% of the time. 100% of their capacity takes into account shutdowns. And you'll see there, the red line is the demand. And when the demand over to the left is less than what the baseload facilities are producing, you pump water up to a storage facility. When the demand in the middle there exceeds what the baseload can produce, you then augment the baseload with hydro and with gas. Gas, by the way, is around about twice as expensive as coal, as I'll show you in a moment or two. You'll see there that during the day demand drops off, but towards the evening it goes into a peak again, and you use hydro and gas once again to firm it up. Now I want you to think what happens if you're injecting intermittent power into this. It just creates total chaos. There is absolutely no way within the laws of physics that solar cells on roofs or solar cells in the paddock or windmills can possibly provide you with the cheapest power. Anybody who says that is just absolutely lying. Okay, this shows you, and this is from courtesy of Joe Nova, it shows you that brown coal produces electricity at about 2.9 cents per kilowatt hour. And as we move across, you see that hydro is considerably more expensive, because actually hydro, if you're talking about pumped hydro, you're only getting about 60% of the energy that you've expended pumping the water up when it runs downhill. The next is gas, and you'll see that gas is massively more expensive than is brown coal. And then next comes black coal. Black coal is very useful, especially anthracitic coal, for making steel, and it's best used for that purpose. We should be using brown coal, and we've got hundreds, if not thousands of years of brown coal in this country. Okay, renewables aren't renewables, and everybody's been saying that, so I don't need to tell you that. If you inject unpredictable, intermittent power into the grid, you basically are destroying your grid. Solar rooftop is very, very bad. I've heard politicians stand up here and tell me that solar is, should be part of the mix. Once again, that's bullshit. Okay, so I did a rough scoping study of an 8 gigawatt pumped hydro scheme proposed by the New South Wales government. I found that the cost per kilowatt hour for solar on the roof without any form of backup is 10.4 cents per kilowatt hour. So anybody who thinks that they're getting cheap electricity putting solar cells on their roof, they're deluding themselves. It could be a lot cheaper. The cost per kilowatt hour of rooftop solar with backup is 21 cents. Now, if we were to have sufficient backup for solar and wind, we will need, for an 8 gigawatt system, 4 Warragamba dams perched at 800 metres above sea level. There's no way we can do that in Australia. We just do not have the facility, the terrain to achieve that. Okay, this is what happens when you inject intermittent power. The green line, which you see coming up from 2007 upwards, you'll notice that as we inject more and more intermittent, unpredictable power into the grid, the cost of electricity goes up. And this is the end result. The blue line is the CPI. The red line is what it's costing you. Since 2007 to the present day, the cost of electricity has risen more than 7 times the CPI. And all the time we're being lied to and told that renewables would be cheaper. The CSIRO is an absolute disgrace. I've read the CSIRO's cost gen paper and I cannot believe that anybody would write such rubbish. Okay, we were talking about nuclear and that's been fantastically dealt with by previous speakers, so I won't take up much of your time, except to tell you that Lucas Heights, as you well know, is about 20 kilometres from the centre of Sydney. It's been there for about 50 years. It is a nuclear reactor, but what many people don't know is they've moved from the high flux Australian reactor to the open pool Australian light water reactor in about 3 years. And there were 3 years of talkfest and organising contracts and such like, but the actual physical action took about 3 years. It is a totally different nuclear reactor technology, and yet they were able to do it in 3 years. Anybody who tells us that we can't introduce nuclear power into this country in a space of 20 years is once again lying through their teeth. They must probably have never been on the working end of a shovel in their life. I talk to you there, I say cost depends on regulation. You can over-regulate and make anything very expensive. And the cost of the fuel. Uranium is costed, not because it's of intrinsic value, not because it's difficult to dig up out of the ground or in fact to process, though it is expensive to process. It's charged on the basis of how much energy it produces vis-a-vis coal. So if you own your uranium and if you dig up your uranium and you process your uranium, it's actually very cheap, and so is the electric power it produces. Thorium, we have 3 times more thorium in this country than we have uranium. The first nuclear reactors that were built used thorium. Thorium will produce much more energy and is much safer than uranium. I'm not suggesting that we head straight off onto a thorium molten salt reactors, but I would wish that we were allowed to conduct research into this country and so that we got factual data instead of the mouthings of ignorant, technologically illiterate politicians. Okay, I appeared before the commissioners of the Independent Planning Commission at Wollabadar, and I argued logically, just as I've argued to you today. I got nowhere. I went to Tamworth next up, and I pointed out to them that they're approving projects with no guaranteed performance, which I consider to be unconscionable. Nobody with all of these schemes has talked about what the cost of electricity will be coming out of these wind and solar farms. Neither have they given any guarantee of confidence of being able to meet demand. It's just ridiculous. I pinholed the head commissioner and he admitted to me that he's just doing the government's bidding. So much for being independent. Okay, climate change is only one part of a collage of destructive acts and influences. Australia has for 50 years been under a multifaceted, methodical attack. We've been deindustrialised. We only have 24 days of liquid fuel in this country. If we get cut off by communist China, our defence forces will cease to function after 24 days. We're now $1.3 trillion in debt and we have absolutely nothing to show for it. Okay, how did we get here? And this is really the gem. I was coming here and I thought, I'm going to be singing to the choir. I've got to inject a new idea into your consciousness, though I suspect in many it's already been lurking. We are in this problem because we have poor quality political candidates running for office. They're selected by political parties, generally. That's then combined with poorly conducted elections, which leads to poor quality parliamentarians who have far too much power because the present structure of our government and deficiencies in our Constitution of the Commonwealth of Australia gives them too much power. There is a need for massive reform, and I plan on doing it, or at least sowing the seeds. It'll most probably happen long after I'm dead. Okay, if you want to know more about that, please go to my website, kevinloughrey.com, and click on Ideas and Opinions. And if you want to support me, I don't want your money, I want your moral support. I want you to organise meetings for me. I'm prepared to get in a motorhome and travel all over New South Wales, just as Wade Nordhausen has done. And God bless you, Wade, for what you're doing. I really appreciate it. Okay, I've got to do the same thing, but I want to talk about electoral reform and I want to talk about constitutional reform. We must change the structure of our government. Otherwise, all we'll ever be doing for the whole of our life is putting out bushfires. But we'll never ever get to the arsonist. And that's where the problem really sits. If we could improve the quality of our politicians, and if we had a system of government that protected us from capricious and abusive legislation, then everything would fix itself. Thank you very much for your time.
I told you he was good. He's amazing.